you probably come into the idea of doing a thesis or a master's or a piece of research after your thesis with some kind of fascination or something that happened to you that set off an interest. Or perhaps you've been reading a lot and you found a question or an issue in the reading that has made you want to explore a bit further. So the research questions that we actually develop come from such fascinations, but they're a lot more complicated than the mere fascinations because they are actually the ways in which we can scope how we might ask and answer or merely address, because maybe we can't answer a really deep question using concepts, big ideas, using theories, using methods, and using actual hands-on data gathering techniques, data analysis techniques, so that we can address our question at the end or maybe answer our question and say what we found and why it matters in the conclusion. So sometimes you're driven to do your research by a research question that was given to you by a group, a research group, a project group. And they're all working on this question, and you're going to be working on a bit of this question. Or sometimes you come into your research because you have this burning question about how people relate to each other or cope with issues in real life, or what a particular author was focusing on and how they were arguing about it and how it contributes to our understanding about something. So your research question will arise from an interest you have in life, perhaps, but also a disciplinary interest that you have. And the main thing that we're having to think about doing with a research question is how do we put it into action? How do we actually get it going so we can ask it and maybe address it and maybe answer it. And where do they come from? They come from our experiences, and they come from our interests, and they come a lot from our reading. So you might well be reading something quite complex or something quite topical, and you think, I wonder what is happening here, or I wonder what happened there, or I wonder if we can explore this. So you are interested, you're fascinated. And the next step then is, as I said, to put it into some kind of form or some kind of action to actually make it real. Not so you have a big research question and you have to cut it into manageable, smaller research questions. So sometimes we set out with an overarching interest, and that expresses itself as maybe just an unanswerable question, and sometimes just a fascination. Early students that I worked with, one of them came in and said, I want to look at airline terrorism. So in order to help him narrow that down to something he could actually ask a proper research question about, I had to ask him, I and the other supervisor had to ask him, what do you mean by that? Where might you be asking it? So how might you be asking it? What's to be gained by asking this as a question? Because it was only a fascination. We had to help him turn it into an askable, doable, manageable question that was worth asking. And through those sorts of questions, why are you interested in this? What sparked your interest? What kind of things do you want to find out? How will you go about it? We were trying to help him make it into something that was doable. So that fascination, or that fascinating piece of reading that underlies your research question, has to be turned into a doable, practical thing. So where does it go? Well, it initially might well appear in your title, so that you're focusing what your research title for your thesis, and maybe afterwards your journal article or your book, will contain some version of the question that you're exploring and maybe answering. And it will certainly appear in the introduction, which is the place where we put our research questions. I've been saying research question. We have an overall question, but in order to make it manageable and doable and askable, we usually cut it into 2, 3, or 4 questions. We don't cut it into 18 because you'd be fragmented and asking questions forever and you'd never be able to put it together. So 3 or 4 is probably manageable. And these are a mixture of how and what questions usually. If there's too many what questions, what are the reasons for poverty in in South Africa? What are the reasons for water insecurity in the Sudan? What are the reasons for? Well, you'll just get factual answers, so you can go away and find that out quite easily, but that's not problematizing anything. That's not really inquiring. So we have some how questions. How can those who are underprivileged gain the kind of cultural capital they need in order to be able to get on in the world and get good jobs and money? Shrink that's a long question, but it is a how question. And immediately with a how question, we start to think, how can I theorize this? Where can I find the reading to help me ask this question? And I want to think about how things link together if I have a how question. So not too many what questions, because you're going to get factual answers, but some how questions that cause you to probe and ask deeply. So this is turning the fascination into doable research questions, and we will explain those in the introduction. But that's not the first place where we lay out our nice, clear, clean research questions that are part of the map of the whole research. They are going to appear all the way through the thesis as they drive us all the way through our research, because this is our main focus, and addressing them or answering them is the main reason for doing the research. So with the coherence of a really good thesis, what you can see is the establishment of a question perhaps in the title, the clarification of the research questions in the introduction, and the concepts within them have been problematized. What do you mean by? What do you mean by? And so have the issues about how you're going to go about it. How will you get to your population? How will you ask these questions? How will you know that the answers you've got are addressing the question you asked in the first place? We're always exploring and narrowing in on answering our questions. So the introduction sets them up and makes them realistic and doable and quite short. And the rest of the research works coherently to try and ask the right questions in the right way, to theorize in the right way, to understand the data in the right way, and to come to some conclusions, factual and conceptual conclusions, that have worked with these questions all the way through your piece of research. They are your main focus, and you will probably repeat them a couple of times in the thesis. So it's possible, if you're doing a thesis by publication, that you have 4 research questions and you have 4 articles. So each article specifically addresses, engages with, explores using, and maybe answers a research question. It's your guide, it's your focus. And so you have 4 research questions, you've got 4 articles. You set them all up. If this is a thesis by publication, you set them all up in the exegesis at the beginning, which is the abstract, introduction, literature review, methodology and methods, all scoped out. They appear systematically as appropriately in your 4 articles. So one research question leading one article, one the next, and so forth. And then you pull it all together in the end in the epilogue, which is like a large conclusion to the overall project. So they will run throughout a conventional thesis and be asked and addressed and explored and brought together in the conclusions. And in a thesis by publication, they might well be what leads your 4 articles. So you need research questions that are actually answerable and not just fascinations. So if you have a fascination with something, your job then is to read, see what else has been done in this area in relation to this question, and to see how you might go about your research. So in the introduction, we've explained our research questions, and the rest of the research and the rest of the thesis helps us ask the questions, deal with finding something theorized from the data that helps us answer them a bit and pull it together into conclusions.